Hello guys, and welcome to a new video. Today we're going to be looking at a fellow named goufygoggs who is salty that their game didn't get the recognition they feel that it deserves when compared to another game, Vampire Survivors. Now, this fella goes into a pretty neat little spiel on game design, I'll give him that, because I really like what they're saying, but the problem is, there are reasons why Vampire Survivors blew up and Endless Overdrive didn't, but we'll get to that. First, let's have the person say what they're going to say, but at 1.5 times speed so that you and I don't get bored.
Back in January of 2021, I released a game called Endless Overdrive. It was a small project I developed over the course of about 2 months, an arcade title where you move across a grid playing field, shooting blocks and building combos. Very simple premise, but there are 2 catches here. The first of which is that moving and shooting are both automated. You can decide where you move, but not when, and you can only ever fire in the same direction that you're moving. Secondly, every time a block is shot, it gets frozen in place, restricting the amount of space you're able to maneuver through. This is why the combo system exists. Maintaining long enough combos changes the properties of your bullets, allowing you to clear the screen of any frozen blocks. If you ask me, making single-screen arcade games like this is basically the best starting point you can have as a game designer, because anybody can make this kind of game, but making one that actually holds people's attention is one hell of a challenge. When your mechanical scope is so minuscule, you seriously have to think through every design decision you make, maximizing the amount of overlap between each mechanic in order to squeeze out as much depth and nuanced interactions as you possibly can. Hopefully the end result will be like an elaborate Jenga tower, every block laid with such deliberation that to remove a single one would send the whole thing crashing down. Developing games like this, you really can't take anything for granted. For instance, in games that have combo systems in them, dropping a combo is almost always treated like a mistake, plain and simple. But when I was working on Endless Overdrive, putting in such a binary system as that completely destroyed the balance of the game. There needed to be some kind of benefit to dropping combos, or else the game wouldn't work. So I introduced a second enemy type which traces the player's footsteps and gradually speeds up as the game progresses. And the only way to get it to slow back down is to drop a combo. When you mesh mechanics together like this, ensuring that each one has its own set of pros and cons, what you get is a system where you need to think ahead of yourself. Plan for the future, because every action you take will have a ripple effect on every other action. That's depth, that's decision making, the beating heart of gameplay. A system that lacks ambiguity, where every choice can be boiled down to clear right or wrong, can hardly be considered a game at all. This is why I find the explosive success of Vampire Survivors so concerning. The first time I played it, I was really struck by how much it reminded me of Endless Overdrive. Both games have automated attacks and swarms of enemies that come at you from all sides of the screen with simplistic movement. But these surface-level similarities only highlighted for me that the design philosophies underlying the games could not be more opposed. I have never in my life played something so hostile to the concept of depth and decision-making as Vampire Survivors.
Okay, so I've played both of these games now, and yeah, they are very similar. Enough to where an idiot like me can see it, and I do feel like it was fun. However, they say that Vampire Survivors is hostile to the concepts of depth and decision-making. Buddy, while I think your game is fun, or at least as fun as it can be, to say that Vampire Survivors lacks depth and nuance is an outright lie. In Endless Overdrive, all you do is direct your block to shoot other moving blocks and you can't run into any of them while building combos. And while there is an incentive to dropping combos, the gameplay doesn't really evolve now, does it? Compare that to Vampire Survivors, where each character you can choose is different, has their own special ability to give you a reason to actually play that character. You can purchase upgrades for your characters, and as they level up, you have the ability to choose what you want to level up during that run. And you can wind up screwing yourself over. How is that anything other than depth and decision making? Look, goufygoggs, I will readily give respect to anyone who can program a game, even simplistic ones like yours, and no, I'm not insulting them. But between Endless Overdrive and Vampire Survivors is the clear winner, at least for me.
If you were a designer that actually cared about nuanced, multifaceted game mechanics, you would not make a single choice that this game makes. The most obvious way to show this would be the enemy design, the thing that even people who like the game complain about. Every enemy here does the same thing. They walk towards you. Some do this a little bit faster, some do it while having slightly more health, but that's it. Did you expect that skeletons carrying different weapons would attack you in different ways, or attack you at all? Nope, they just apathetically limp at you, same as all the rest. With only a few incredibly infrequent exceptions, that is the most you're getting out of this enemy roster. Since there's no meaningful differentiation between enemy types, there's also no reason to ever prioritize killing certain enemies over others, and considering that the majority of the levels are endless fields devoid of level hazards or geometry, there's no positional aspect to combat either. Walking away from an enemy before it can touch you is the full extent of the combat depth you can expect from Vampire Survivors. This strategy does not change or evolve in any way across a playthrough. Top to bottom, it's as bare bones in one note as a combat system system can feasibly be.
I've skimmed through the reviews on Steam, at least the ones that show up before the whole display all X number of reviews, and when you consider that this game has damn near 200,000 and I really want to get this review done before much longer, I'm sure you can guess what I did next. I clicked that link, typed in enemy to see if anything came up. Nothing did. No reviewer that I saw on Steam said anything about the enemy design. And you're talking about a bare-bones combat system? Look, dude, I respect that you made a game, but the combat system in your game was, at least in my opinion, significantly worse.
The real draw to the game then is its progression system. Killing enemies awards you with EXP gems, granting you new weapons and abilities with each level up. Hypothetically, this adds some actual meat to the game, allowing you to come up with highly personalized builds for your characters. In practice, it's essentially meaningless, as the upgrades you're allowed to choose from are randomized every time you level up, and each weapon is already poorly differentiated to begin with. Since they're all passive and almost never have unique attack properties, you're only choosing weapons based on their range and damage output. To the game's credit, there is a small sliver of strategizing here, as it's important to choose weapons that cover different ranges, but that's hardly enough of a choice to build an entire combat system around. The problem is that the fundamental actions of movement and attacking lack any real depth. As a result, despite the fact that you can build characters with wildly varying loadouts, those choices have no effect on your playstyle. Regardless of whether you're controlling a damage tank or a glass cannon, a slow-moving death machine or a quick-footed wimp, the way you view and approach combat encounters is identical. If you see an enemy, walk into them until they die, but if they're going to walk into you first, run away.
So if I had to guess, I'm gonna say goufygoggs has never played one of the Ys games before then. Or at least, most of the earlier ones. Most of the earlier Ys games require the player to run into enemies, usually at an angle, to damage them. Also, you say that the weapons are randomized, but there are other upgrades too, such as armor to lower damage, potions that can lay down damaging floors. It isn't just weapons that get randomized, it's all of your upgrades that get randomized. Furthermore, you say the movement and attacking lack any real depth, but it's the same in most other video games. Now, if you were talking about chess, then I would agree with you. But here in Vampire Survivors, you have to move around to get away from enemies because walking into them actually damages you, not the enemies. You need to keep away from the enemies, not run into them.
This is not combat design, this is nothing. It's also probably not a surprise to any of you. Even looking through positive reviews of the game, basically everyone concedes that the mechanics are completely vapid. The real secret to its addictive gameplay is the power trip of it all, getting to watch numbers go up, an increasing swarm of enemies being obliterated by a barrage of bullets growing in equal measure. It's reasonably satisfying, and there's nothing wrong with the game making you feel good for playing well. My problem though is that playing well has virtually nothing to do with your knowledge of the game systems or decision-making ability, and everything to do with the amount of time you've sunk into the game. As I've discussed, combat being as shallow as it is means that there's no skills you can feasibly improve at as a player. The way you play the game 20 hours in is exactly the same way you were playing 10 minutes in. The only avenue for improvement is spending hours grinding money so you can buy permanent stat upgrades and extra characters. This is why I consider the game to be predatory and, honestly, morally reprehensible. As a game designer, you have a responsibility to not waste people's fucking time.
I don't doubt what goufygoggs is saying here, but at the same time, this game isn't predatory precisely because it doesn't have microtransactions or, God forbid, loot boxes. They're right, a AAA game company is going to copy Vampire Survivors gameplay one day and slather it in microtransactions and possibly loot boxes, but hopefully not anytime soon.
To build games which actually engage players mentally, testing their ability to adapt to new situations and solve problems. A game that ropes you into devoting hours of your life to it in return for nothing but completely unearned hits of dopamine is malicious and evil. Even if you're of the belief that this game isn't technically predatory because it lacks microtransactions, you at the very least have to admit that this style of game design is wide open to exploitation. It's only a matter of time before some AAA company copies Vampire Survivors verbatim, only with even more addictive gameplay slathered in microtransactions.
Dude, every video game wastes people's time. Seriously, what does playing video games really do apart from offering stress relief and entertainment? Now, if we were talking about edutainment games, that would be one thing, and you yourself already said that there's nothing wrong with a power trip approach. Clearly, this fella has never played any of the Dragon Quest games, Final Fantasy games, the Glory of Heracles series games, Pokemon games. And while those games do have systems that you need to keep in mind, such as elemental strengths and weaknesses, but they try to tell stories, except for Pokemon. But for me, it's all about getting those numbers ever higher just so I could see that ending.
Game design is the art of decision-making, presenting players with a complex, evolving knot to untangle, problems which force you to think beyond the present moment and consider what consequences might happen in the future. But Vampire Survivors has it completely backwards. This is a game only concerned with the past, an entire system whose sole purpose is to highlight the mild satisfaction of realizing that your stats are bigger than they were 5 minutes ago, that you're killing more enemies than you were 5 minutes ago. There is nothing beyond that. There is no future in Vampire Survivors.
And I'm sure you think that there's no future in JRPGs, and yet they're doing fine. I'm sure people 30 years ago were saying the same things about RPGs in general, like Wizardry, Might and Magic, The Bard's Tale, and the like. And yet RPGs are flourishing today, are they not? Then again, in Goofy's defense, most RPGs do try and tell a story. Most of them are cliched and terrible, but at least they have stories to tell.
The fact that the project has already been successful enough to have spawned imitators makes me feel embarrassed to believe in video games. This is artistically worthless dreck that displays a stunning lack of imagination and curiosity for game design as an art form.
Oh, and I suppose yours does.
You might think I'm jumping the gun, being mean to a game that's still in early access. However, I sincerely believe that the only way this game could be meaningfully improved would be to completely rework the mechanics from a fundamental level, and that is not going to happen. Vampire Survivors will never have more depth, because these mechanics were not built to be deep in the first place. It cannot become more interesting, it can only become more. More weapons, more items, more stages, more enemies, none of which address the fact that the core of this game is a vacuous nothing where the concepts of decision-making and thoughtful play go to die. And so what we're left with is an ever-expanding turd, continuously polished to the delight of a captive audience. And if that's the future of video games, I don't want to be a part of it.
Okay, good, now go away. Now, you say that the only way the game could be made good is to rework the mechanics from a fundamental level, and yet you also admit that that's not going to happen. Of course it isn't. This game is successful. You're just salty that a game you put together in 2 months, which while I do find fun, didn't blow up the exact same way Vampire Survivors did. In fact, yours didn't blow up at all. Furthermore, have you ever played roguelikes before? Depth of mechanics are not high up on the list of priorities, trust me on that. Furthermore, if this game is an ever-expanding turd as you called it, then why are people praising it the way that they do? Clearly it's fun and addicting. Another problem you face is that your game took 2 months to make. This one took over a year, around about 1.5 years, I believe. The point is, the more time you spend working on something and fine-tuning it, the better the end result will be. That's exactly what happened between the two games. Endless Overdrive only had 2 months of development time, while Vampire Survivors had over a year's worth, and Vampire Survivors turned out better. Anyways, that's gonna be it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll link both of the games below if you'd like to check them out. Both of them are good, one of them more so than the other, but they'll both be linked if you're at all interested. I'll see you in the next video of several, where we'll be going over the videos Quantum TV uploaded to his now deleted Controversial Truth channel. I'll see you all then, folks. Bye-bye for now.